Hey, Dan, can you explain all these weird charges on the Gatecrasher's credit card?
Hey, Mike, I absolutely can explain those. Well, the first one was a school.
Oh, what?
A school. I'm opening the Gatecrashers Academy for mutants, metas, and other superpowered people who want to be superheroes and stuff.
You should work on that name a little, but you know our insurance doesn't cover Sentinel attacks, right?
I actually did know that, which brings me to the other charges.
Yeah, there are so many weird wire transfers and stuff here. Dan, are you shorting stocks?
No, dude. You ready for this? I went through the Weapon X program, bub.
Those are terrifying. Should you be bleeding that much?
So now that I have become the Wolverine, I'm going to protect the school myself.
The blood is all over your pants.
And I'm going to fight the Toad and Juggernaut and all those villains.
You should really go to the hospital.
And then I'm going to beat up Magneto and I'm going to say, that's Mag fucking Neato when he...
So I guess he didn't get the healing factor stuff as well. I'm gonna need a wheelbarrow to get him to the ER. Enjoy the show!
Welcome to Gatecrashers, a podcast dedicated to kicking open the door to your next favorite thing. The mission, the creed, the code is this: to make all nerdy things more approachable and accessible to everyone. We want you to find a universe that you'll fall in love with. I'm your guest host today, Connor Goldsmith. My pronouns are he, him, but honestly, whatever's fine. I'm a literary agent and the host of the podcast Cerebro. I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you, Daniel, for inviting me. And now I will pass the baton to whoever wants to go next.
We froze on the last bit.
And now I will pass the baton to whoever wants to go next.
Jordan?
All right. Hi, I'm Jordan Blum. I'm one of the co-creators of the show on Hulu, Marvel's M.O.D.O.K, as well as writing some other TV stuff. I am excited to be here. My pronouns are he, him, and I think that's my intro.
Hi, I'm Dan. My pronouns are he, him. I hope you know who I am by now. So excited to have both of you here. Today is a big one. It's kind of a huge property for a lot of people, the X-Men. So I wanted to start off with where you got started in X-Men. And I don't want to ask your favorite character because that's a loaded question. I want to ask which character you're going to go to the mat for. Like if someone's talking shit, who are you swinging for?
So I came to the X-Men very young. My father is a collector, so I often say that I learned the X-Men as sort of my first language. I was like 7 or 8, and he's giving me hardcovers, like, be careful with these. And so the material I'm really particularly attached to is not the material that was coming out in the 90s when I was a kid. It's more the material from the 70s and 80s, particularly the 80s. My favorite characters who I go to the mat for a lot are Betsy Braddock, although her ninja period is problematic, and if anybody has a problem with that, you're not wrong. She knows, she's aware. Emma Frost, who I came to really love in the Grant Morrison run in the early aughts, in the mid-aughts, I guess. It was like 2000 to 2004 by the end of it. And then famously, I am Madeleine Pryor's personal defense attorney. It's something that comes up on my show a lot. Madeleine Pryor, for people who don't know anything about the X-Men, is a character who is a character who was introduced to be someone's love interest after who was introduced to be Cyclops' love interest after Jean Grey died, and then they got married, and then they brought Jean Grey back because of editorial interference. So then it was retroactively declared that Madeleine was a clone of Jean, and then she went crazy and became an evil demon sorceress. And honestly, I think it's pretty unfair. So I often am in her corner.
I feel like that summary is exactly what I love about X-Men and drew me to it, which is that
right. That's what's fun.
Yes,
like that's a pretty famous X-Men story that I just related to you, and it's just as crazy as it sounds.
Yeah, I feel like when I was a early comics reader, I was reading Batman and Superman, and those were my ways in. Spider-Man, and when I want to say it was like a classic X-Men I read that basically summarized the entire Silver Age, and I realized that this went so deep and it is so convoluted and tangled, and the idea of digging in and understanding X-Men continuity is what makes, I think, the franchise so incredible. Is it's so layered and so rich, and mostly because Chris Claremont wrote it for 17 years and built upon it, that the challenge, it felt like the next stage in comic reading was like, okay, if you can handle these, icons, like Superman stuff, then the next stage is X-Men, and you're going to need a shovel because you have to dig out this continuity.
Yeah. I am. So a lot of kids my age started with the cartoon, the 90s one. And I started with a cartoon, but it was not the X-Men one. It was actually Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And they were in some like haunted mansion bumbo jumbo with the X-Men, but like all of their voice actors were absolutely horrendous. Like Cyclops has maybe the worst voice in all of voice acting history. It's awesome. And then I guess I just kept reading it. I'm a huge Spider-Man fan. So X-Men was always like right next to it. So I started picking up more X-Men stuff as I got older, but I don't really think like my love for it started until I was really not even just like a couple years ago, where I was like, oh, I want to read like as much X-Men as possible. And the character I would go to the mats for is Mr. Sensitive. I love Ecstatic.
I thought you were going to say Mr. Sinister, and I was like, interesting choice, but
so Mr. Sinister, I absolutely love because he just seems like the biggest kind of bitch. Like,
oh yeah,
I love his energy in this book especially, and he's just like, I love his energy. I love the pizzazz that he brings to the table of every conversation that he's in.
That was Kieran Gillen's doing, really, because before that, he was taken very seriously in a way that didn't make any sense given the over-the-top design. So I'm glad that we're just leaning into him being a camp goddess. Yeah. Because that's exactly who he should be.
Yeah, I think the camp is like what makes him incredible. But Ecstatic was like the run that I was like, oh, there's like different stuff for different X-Men fans.
Yeah, I always say on the show that I don't really think of the Milligan X-Force that turns into Ecstatics as like really being an X-book. It almost feels like it's its own thing, but it's good. I mean, I'm not saying that to devalue it. It's just so separated out from the rest of them, and it's not really referenced most of the time in any other X-Men titles.
But it ties directly into what Grant Morrison is doing at a time, which is that mutant culture grows and people they become celebrities.
Thematically connected. It's just like the characters are it feels kind of like an Elseworld to me a lot of the time.
It kind of feels like satire at points of like what
Morrison
it is a
satire for sure.
That they're like reality stars rather than heroes. But like Mr. Sensitive wrestles Iron Man naked, so like that's kind of the energy I try to bring to the table is like, let's go. So today we're talking about the modern X-Men specifically and how to get into what's going on now. I had decided to do this before Hickman announced that he was kind of stepping back from leading the X office. But Jordan, why don't you give like a little back of the box blurb about X-Men and the Hoxpox.
Sure. So the X-Men are a team of mutants who are hated and feared by all of society, a group who finds their worth with one another. This episode is to help you get into the modern era of X-Men, which all starts with House of X and Powers of X. For the first time, mutants know... What's that?
It's House of X and Powers
oh, God.
of 10.
Yes.
The X,
You know what
the
I was
second
thinking?
X is a
You're right.
10.
It's all because
Gatekeep
people call it
goalposts.
Hoxpox.
I call it Hoxpox, but when you read it all out, the X in
is.
the powers is a 10.
All
It's
right,
a 10.
let's take it again. Right?
No, you can listen. Just keep going. This is the X-Men, baby. It's
But I
fucking
just lost
confusing.
all
Can I swear on this
credibility.
podcast?
I lost all credibility to
Oh,
all
yeah.
X-Men fans.
Oh, okay.
100%. You can say fuck. It's fine.
Great. Just checking. Jordan, take that line again.
All right, thank you.
This episode is to help you.
Okay. This episode is to help you get into the modern era of X-Men, which all starts with House of X and powers of 10. For the first time, mutants no longer have to run. They finally have a place of their own, but that always comes at a price. So following the creation of a nation, let me start that. Follow the creation of a nation in the masterpiece that is House of X, Powers of X, also known as Hoxpox.
You just did it again.
God damn it. Okay. I'm bad at these things. Okay.
You're done. They're coming for you.
I know. Follow the creation of a nation in the masterpiece that is known as Hoxpox.
Okay.
You can say
literally
Hoxpox.
just. Okay, fine.
That's how it's scripted. It says Hoxpox.
No, I know. I was just honestly leave all this in. This is good. This is good
this is
stuff.
good. This is good content. This is
This is
awesome.
good. This is content.
All right.
Jordan, you're gonna get bullied. It's fine.
This is why I don't have an X-Men podcast.
It's
Listen.
fine. This is why I edit my X-Men podcast really aggressively because guess what? It's easy to misspeak when talking about the X-Men.
And yes, yes, I would not want to ever get anything wrong and have to defend myself about the X-Men.
Well, it's particularly like I feel like my problem with my show is that I've set kind of a bar at this point. Like people expect me to know everything, which I don't, but I guess I give off that sort of affect. So when I fuck something up, I get like 10 emails like, so that was actually, and I'm like, fuck. You know, like at one point I said Cable had to kill his own son, Tyler, and actually Wolverine killed Tyler. And I got to be honest, I forgot because I don't care about Tyler Dayspring or most of the stuff that happened to Wolverine in the 90s. So, you know, these things happen.
I believe when he was killed, he was known as Nemesis.
He was, a.k.a. Mr. Tolliver.
Mr. Tolliver?
That was the alias he was using when he was doing sneaky stuff. Yeah.
When he was a Rob Liefeld character, when they had no plan for who he was going to be, so he was retconned.
Yeah, it was like, who is the mysterious Mr. Tolliver? Yeah, right. So anyway,
I love it. Yeah, I was writing this like brief history stuff out, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna get bullied. Like I don't know this stuff that well. So like, if there's something wrong,
welcome. Hope you survive the experience because that is my life.
X-Men fans are really forgiving, and
particularly with the creators and with other fans, they're just the nicest group of people you can ever meet. Honestly, I will say that the audience that has emerged around my show has been really, really lovely. So I'm grateful.
They have. Also, congratulations, 50 episodes.
Thank you. We just finished season 1.
Yeah, a lot of
really
positive
the
things.
Skids episode though, but I'm sure.
Well, that one does feature a famous television writer named Jordan Blum. Daniel, what were you saying before Jordan so rudely cut you off?
I know, Jordan went and got another drink. So let's talk about the creation of the X-Men and what really made them them.
Okay. So the X-Men make their debut in X-Men #1 by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in 1963 with a team that is colloquially called the O5 or Original 5 by fans. That's Cyclops, Iceman, Angel, Beast, and Marvel Girl, who will later become Phoenix, but is usually just called Jean Grey. It's complicated. Don't worry about it. The thing is that isn't really where the franchise took off. It's usually considered a low point for the Kirby-Lee collaboration of the 60s that produced so many iconic heroes. The X-Men as a concept didn't quite hit until much later. The 60s run, which is only Lee and Kirby for about 14 issues, and then is written by other people and drawn by other people, runs to issue 66 and then is canceled and goes into reprints until 1975 when Giant Size X-Men #1 relaunches the franchise in a big way. And that leads into what Jordan is supposed to read next.
Not me. That was Dan.
That's
Oh,
on
it's
me.
you. Okay. All right.
I was just
It
sitting
said
here.
Jordan before. It did. I swear to God.
I was just sitting here marveling at like how much you just added there, and just like, wow, so good at this. So
Shaming
Look,
us.
it's my second job at this point. It's like all I fucking do.
yeah, mine. I'm just playing on the mud around here. Okay, so when the X-Men we really know today came around, and did you already? Yeah, you already went over all this.
No, I just mentioned I gave you like an on ramp to giant size X-Men.
Oh, this is why you're the
Throwing
you're the professional.
segues your way.
Yeah, I know. So I'm not used to that. I'm not used to like people being good at this. It's just
I just try to make it's like
I know.
you make it sound like an organic. You make it feel like, because it is, but you make it really feel
Yeah.
to the listener like an organic conversation. By if you have like a scripted patter moment like that, you then sort of come up with an ad lib to take it into the next thing. That's sort of
yeah.
Don't worry, Dan. When I get
just-
to my section again, I'll make you look great.
yeah, it's fine. I usually consider this show just me and Jake hitting each other with wiffle ball bats in the backyard.
Well, it's a
So-
popular show. I was excited when you asked me to come on because I have heard a
Yeah,
lot about it.
thank you.
I haven't listened to it because I'm going to be real. I'm very, very bad at listening to podcasts that are not my podcast, which I only listen to because I have to edit it. So I have, but now I will because I've been on it. Once I go on something, I feel the need to like, get into the backlog.
We we'll talk about that.
There's a really
afterwards.
good episode where they talk about M.O.D.O.K.
Yeah, we asked him how M.O.D.O.K showered.
But who cares about M.O.D.O.K? I'm kidding. That's a joke. That's a joke.
Got him. So you have Giant Size X-Men, which introduces the characters that everyone knows and loves. Wolverine, the biggest character of all time. My favorite character as of last week when everyone was shitting on him. He actually debuted in Incredible Hulk 181, where he was like a nothing.
So glad you said that because I was about to jump in.
Yeah, oh yeah. I just decided last week that Wolverine's my favorite.
Do you like him with whiskers?
Oh, I like him hairy.
Yeah,
I
but
like
he
him.
had whiskers on the costume
Yeah,
when
on
he
the
was introduced
costume.
in Incredible
Oh,
Hulk.
no,
That
I
gets
like-
cut before Giant Size. I think here's the thing. He's most people's favorite character. That's why, like, people were like,
Not
"Ugh,
mine."
not mine either. But everybody was like, "Who wants a Wolverine event?" And I was like, "Everyone who buys comics and isn't on Twitter." So relax,
Yeah,
baby. It's
yeah,
gonna sell a
yeah.
bazillion copies.
Who keeps the lights on?
I think
Batman
if-
and Wolverine.
I think if we were reading in the 70s, I think he'd be our favorite character. I think if we were there before he
No,
became Wolverine,
honey, it's always Storm in the 70s.
Storm's
There's
pretty
no
amazing.
way. I don't know what planet you're coming from.
Well, I'm a Cyclops
70s and
guy.
80s. Yeah, but I'm saying 70s and 80s, there's nobody but Storm who kicked your boy's ass without her powers. So, I'm just saying.
Storm is a better character, but I'm saying I
fine,
understand
fine.
if you went on the journey where Wolverine wasn't Wolverine. You know what I mean? Like
No, I get it. Before he was
Yeah.
overexposed.
Right.
We
came in.
We're
when
getting
he was,
wait. We're getting.
Okay.
We're getting. So I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
No,
Daniel.
it's okay.
Let's
Listen,
get into it.
I love this. So, you got Wolverine, you got Storm, you got Nightcrawler, and Colossus, just to name a few. But more importantly, this is where we are introduced to noted kink haver, fetish enthusiast, and BDSM gear activist Christopher Claremont. Chris made the X-Men what they are today, full stop. So much of the character, iconic stories, and the entire reason that the X-Men are pretty much a household name came from this, was it 16-year run?
16 years.
I thought it was 17.
He says, okay, he comes on in 75. He leaves in 91. How you want to measure it is up to you.
Yeah, after a certain point, I'd like to stop measuring. He built storylines that really didn't pay off for a number of years, and he was pretty much the mastermind of like what the X-Men became and what they're sort of still known for.
I'll say
it was
this:
during-
one of the biggest influences on my work in long form storytelling.
One of the biggest influences on like how I interact with all art, really, which is just one of those things. He was, I mean, when he got on this book, he was 25 years old. And he was pretty untested. He'd written some stuff and he'd been an assistant at Marvel, but it was a franchise that had failed. So they were like, let's take a chance and let Chris write it. And it turned out to be a dynamite hit that became the biggest comic book in the entire world.
Mm-hmm. And remember,
So-
Stan Lee always said like the illusion of change, but I think Claremont fought that. And I think if you read X-Men, characters
Yeah.
really do grow and change.
They
become
grow, they
different people.
age.
Yeah.
he revolutionized in particular, and there are other people who did this. James DeMatteis deserves some credit for this. There are people who, but in terms of modern comics and the soap opera thing that we think of, it really, I think, is Chris Claremont who revolutionized that. The X-Men is a human drama in a way that with a giant ensemble cast in a way that not a lot of superhero stories were. And it is that high drama, kinky, sexy vibe that I think makes it so indelibly the X-Men. And that ethos, it also, Chris Claremont loves a powerful woman. And the female characters of the X-Men were more powerful and more actualized than almost any female characters in superhero comics had ever been, and frankly, ever still have been a lot of the time. And that's because he put that banner on the ground and then other people picked it up. And now, and that included the women who were collaborating with him. His editors, Louise Simonson and Ann Nesenti, who also wrote. His colorist, Glynis Oliver. There was a definite... It's a team effort. I think that we call it the Claremont run in a way that is a little auteurist, but he does. They'll all say he deserves the credit. I just do think it's notable that there were several women in the room, which is another reason I think that this comic was so forward thinking on that level.
To your point, Connor, I feel like people always go, well, who's the Marvel Wonder Woman? And I've seen, people push Captain Marvel and other characters.
Storm. It's undeniably Storm.
100%.
That's why Amalgam in the 90s, Amazon, the mashup was Wonder Woman and Storm. The only reason that it's not undeniable to this day is because when Marvel went and they sold their movie rights to the X-Men and merchandising rights to the X-Men to Fox, then they ended up having to de-emphasize the X-Men characters because they no longer had those rights. And you get things like Carol Danvers, who was never, ever a big character, also a Chris Claremont dame, though, but had never really been a Wonder Woman level character, got this very aggressive push because they had all the rights to her. They didn't have to share the windfall with anyone, and they were developing their Marvel Cinematic Universe. So now, yes, Captain Marvel is sort of positioned that way. But back when she was Ms. Marvel, Storm was the biggest female character in comics, I think bigger than Wonder Woman at the height of the X-Men. Because Wonder Woman is a pop cultural icon, but her book was never as big as something like the X-Men.
Storm has Batman, more definitive stories, I would almost say, than Wonder Woman.
Yeah, and I'm not. That's not to shit on Wonder Woman. I just think that it's it's just. Well, no, listen. I think that it's just Wonder Woman is a tricky character, and I think a lot of the time DC hasn't really known what to do with her, and so she has been through a lot of weird permutations. But this is not a Wonder Woman podcast, so I'll drop it.
Not anymore.
I wrote my bachelor's thesis on Wonder Woman, though, so I do have Wonder Woman thoughts.
Did you? All right, cool. I'll save that. Put that little egg up in my noggin.
You know who your guest is for your Wonder Woman episode.
I'm not a big enough fan to do that. It was an analysis, but it is it's a really interesting IP.
Jordan,
all right, you want me to read this? The Hickman era?
You have a controversial part. Good luck. Have fun.
Okay, I haven't read it yet, so dry run. Here we go. It's not all sunshines and rainbows, though. The X-Men stayed as one of the strongest comic series through the 90s. It still holds the record for highest selling comic of all time, with X-Men #1 from Claremont and Jim Lee. As the years passed,
that's the 1991 relaunch, to be clear, because it's not like the first #1 that I mentioned was in the 60s. They did a relaunch. Don't worry about it. Continue.
It's referred to as Mutant Genesis. As the years passed, the series and all the different X series would change hands. After Grant Morrison's incredible run, the X-Men fell into a sort of creative rut. Different stories and creators came and went rather quickly compared to the long run of Claremont. There was another problem, though. With the rise of the MCU, we started to see less emphasis on the X-Men in favor of properties that Marvel did own. Not only were comics affected, but you began to see less X-Men merchandise. They stopped showing up in cartoons, video games, etc. After the mouse started swallowing up IP like the monolith it is, this is my boss, right? You're making
Yeah,
me talk shit.
we can't.
Yeah,
Honestly,
thanks.
I don't think he can say this stuff.
I can say it.
That's right.
I can say it.
I'm not sure you should.
I'm freelance. Fox, who owned the X-Men film franchises, was brought into the fold. With it came a renewed comic emphasis on X-Men. I know this for a fact because we used X-Men characters in M.O.D.O.K.
In M.O.D.O.K.
Yep.
Yeah.
Lila Cheney, baby. Episode 1, pilot. Written into the pilot.
I watched that and I was like, oh God, Jordan's such a fucking nerd.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, it was a great show.
Thank you.
Then we've got what we're in now, which is the Dawn of X. I don't want to just call it the Hickman era because there's a ton of creative people.
I call it the
working.
Krakoa era because
Yeah,
I think Hickman has stressed that he doesn't want it called the
Yes.
Hickman era.
So they started teasing Hickman in comics. Like there was these white pages that would just say Hickman, and like eventually we got to the fact that it was an X-Men book. And after the X-Men had kind of been gone for a little bit after Rosenberg's Uncanny ended.
Yeah, should we do like a little bit like the lead up to this? Because like you have.
Let me actually. Why don't I in like
Okay.
3 sentences because
I'm ready.
We've already run way over long. Here's what happens: Claremont gets pushed out of the franchise in 1991. The X-Men are huge all through the 90s. Then they start to suck in the late 90s, and it falls off. Then Grant Morrison revamps the line in 2001 with New X-Men, which is a gigantic critical success.
Chef's kiss.
After that. And is incredible. After that run ends in 2004, Marvel decides, in part, I think, because they didn't own the characters entirely anymore, but also because Joe Quesada just didn't like that there were so many X-Men stories and X-Men characters. They do an event called House of M, where something called the Decimation happens, and all but about 200 mutants worldwide lose their powers and are written out of the story. That led to about 15 years of what most people, I think, view as substandard X-Men storytelling. There are exceptions. I think the Mike Carey run is superb. I love Zeb Wells' New Mutants. I think writers like
Wolverine and the X-Men, I really like.
I'm not crazy about it. I'm not. Love Jason Aaron's Thor. Love Jason Aaron's Doctor Strange. Not crazy about Wolverine and the X-Men.
There's some Bendis stuff's pretty good. I think there's some good Bendis.
I think people like Bendis. I think there's some good stuff there.
Gillen has some good stuff.
The Zeb Wells New Mutants, I mentioned that already. Gillen, I think, did his best with a short amount of time and a lot of restrictions on, like, again, because of the decimation, what could be done with the franchise. Anyway, The point is, in House of X Powers of 10, Jonathan Hickman refers to that period as the lost decade, which is really funny and I thought was kind of a drag, but it was like, I was like, good of Marvel to let him put that in the comic because they buried this franchise for a long time because the MCU was coming up and they were pushing the Avengers and then they were pushing the Inhumans and that just, the Avengers at least landed.
That's the lost decade.
That's truly, that's the true, right.
That's the lowest of lows for the X-Men.
Yeah, so basically after Inhumans versus X-Men, which was all that shitting on the X-Men and propping up the Inhumans, an IP that no one had ever particularly cared about, that was sort of like the low point, I think, critically and in terms of fan engagement. Then there were a couple runs that people were happy about, but it still wasn't, back to basically, much like Morrison in 2001 had revitalized the franchise after the post-Onslaught late 90s that no one especially liked. This was, they needed a debt clearing. They needed someone to come in and just really revamp the whole thing. And so when Jonathan Hickman, who is sort of known as like a visionary sort of creator, came in with a big plan to relaunch the whole line, clearly they thought it was an appealing idea, and it has succeeded. The X-Men are back on top in a way that they haven't been in decades. And that's why I started my podcast, because I was so energized when I had been so disaffected for so long because I wasn't having fun, even though I still love the characters. So the big premise of, just to take us to the present so that we can jump ahead, because Jordan and I are doing like banter and we've been talking now for like a half an hour. The new premise that Hickman introduces is basically that the mutants have created a sovereign nation on the living island Krakoa where all mutants are welcome. Villains are given amnesty if they will come and be Krakoan, but like then they have to stop being evil, obviously. And the big hook is that because it's a running joke in X-Men lore ever since the 80s, when it happened a couple times in a high-profile way, that the X-Men always come back from the dead. The new premise that Hickman introduces is that due to an advance in mutant technology, mutants now automatically resurrect like Cylons from Battlestar Galactica whenever they die, which has opened up a lot of story opportunities. It also allowed for Marvel to bring back the hundreds and hundreds of characters who had either died over the years or who had been lost in the decimation, because now they have the rights to all these characters, and all of these characters are potentially useful IP for Marvel's multimedia projects.
Except for Rusty Collins.
Well, you know, he's someday.
He's not back.
Did you notice Skids hasn't appeared since our episode? I felt bad. I was like, I really felt like we made a case for Skids.
Hey, she appeared in the M.O.D.O.K miniseries head game.
That was before our episode. And she hasn't appeared since. That's her final appearance to date. You need to write more comics, clearly.
I'll keep Skids alive. Okay, so we should keep moving.
You need to keep her booked and improved. Booked and new and improved and employed and doing great things with their powers. Anyway, moving on. What are some
major themes? What are some major themes of the X-Men, Connor?
This is why my show is like 3 hours. So the X-Men is the main theme of the X-Men that Chris Claremont really brought out, and why I think it struck a chord that the 60s stuff hadn't really. The 60s stuff was more about hiding. It was like being a mutant is something people don't like, so we have to hide. We have to pretend that we're just like everybody else here in the suburbs, and we have to make sure that evil mutants aren't doing things that would be detrimental to our group. As a Jewish reader, I see that as sort of an outgrowth of a lot of 60s Jewish sentiment that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, who are both Jewish creators, were probably thinking about, this idea of like, we need to blend in here in the suburbs, that kind of stuff. What Claremont does is pivot it into being a story more about racism and about homophobia and about all kinds of bigotry allegorically, but he also starts introducing characters like Kitty Pryde, who is Jewish, or he makes Storm the leader of the team, and she's black. And these characters are then able to sort of address the topic more overtly. And as the Claremont run goes on, it becomes about bigotry. It becomes about finding a family, a found family that you choose in a world that doesn't always welcome you when you're born into it. And that is where I think for a lot of LGBTQ plus, et cetera, readers, it became a really resonant metaphor. It doesn't hurt that Chris Claremont sneaks homoerotic subtext into just about every issue, but that's, that's part of it. It's about discrimination. It's about finding your own power. It's about deciding that you are going to stand and be counted as a member of an oppressed class and be cool with that, and, tell people to fuck off if they have an issue with it. It's about fighting the fear of the other. It's about all kinds of things. It's not always completely successful because these are really heady topics to tackle in a superhero comic. And also, any comic that's overtly political is going to age weird sometimes. But I think overall, it was a game changer and was, I think, pretty successful. I think a lot of it still really holds up today. And I think that the Krakoa era has begun to pose really fascinating questions about minority actualization and self-empowerment and what it means to refuse to live on the majority's terms anymore, which I think is very relevant in the 21st century. So it's a metaphor that I think still has a lot of power and is sort of an unlimited vehicle for stories.
Are you guys curious who may like this comic?
There you go.
This is what Dan has scripted. This has been a comic that I've heard from a lot of non-comic fans that they enjoyed. It feels like an epic sci-fi story. But really, anyone who has ever felt like they don't have a place, they truly belong, the X-Men are for you. I to go off Dan's script, I actually gave this to friends who are non-comic readers, and they loved it as just like really heady sci-fi. You know, I think it works as something almost separate from the X-Men as well. Like, you can be someone who loves the continuity, who loves kind of all the backdrop to this world, but you can also come in and just get something that's really exciting and fresh sci-fi.
Honestly, I probably shouldn't have scripted anything and just told you and Connor to go at it for 2 hours.
You're getting that anyway.
Yeah, I love it.
Jordan and I'll go at it as much as you want for as long as you want.
Oh, don't test me with a good time. So the best place to get this would be at your local comic shop. They have a ton of X-Men because there is a ton of X-Men now. Hoxpox has a beautiful hardcover that you could pick up and a paperback trade you can get almost anywhere books are sold. It's also available on the Marvel Unlimited app. For the modern X-Men line, House of X and Power of 10 is the best place to start. But if you're looking to jump into some older stuff, you can get Giant Size X-Men #1 in 1975, which kicks off the aforementioned Claremont era. The story continues in Uncanny X-Men 94. You can get new X-Men 144 in 2001, the start of the Grant Morrison run on the title, as the X-Men enter the new millennium, dealing with a world-shattering tragedy. Then you can get all new X-Men #1, 2012, following a long stretch of loss and defeats. The X-Men try to find hope, again, by bringing time-displaced versions of themselves to the present. We are going to get into some Hoxpox spoiler territory after the jump, so go read it, come back and listen to the rest of the episode. Hoxpox. Thoughts, feelings, what do you want to talk about?
I want to go.
I think it's...
Yeah.
Jordan, you go.
Okay.
Jordan, you go. I talk so
right
much about this fucking franchise every
the
week.
Mora stuff, like the retcon, because this that's my favorite issue of the series, right? Like, it's a complete story about how we learn.
That's issue 2.
Yes, that we learn that she's a mutant, that we always thought she was a human. It turns out her mutant power is basically that she keeps being reborn or reincarnated. She has multiple lives. I think 10, right, is where it cuts off. And she has lived multiple timelines where she has tried to save mutant kind, destroy it, back and forth. And now this is the idea of Hoxpox comes out of her trying all these multiple lifetimes, right? And she gives this idea to Xavier. And this is where I struggled so much with reconciling previous continuity, to the point where I was at a Marvel party in New York and I drunkenly tried to talk to a lot of writers and have them explain it to me, and it went very poorly. So I'd be curious, Connor, if you can explain to me if Xavier has this knowledge of all these previous lifetimes, right? He reads Moira's mind. Why does he allow things like Onslaught, all these other storylines where the X-Men are in peril and we're seeing his thoughts and he's acting in the moment? Why does it take this long to get to Krakoa?
Well, Jordan, there are 2 episodes of my podcast that might be helpful. One is the episode on Moira McTaggart, which dives into all of this stuff really in depth. The other one is actually my episode on Brian Braddock, randomly, with Jordan D. White, who is the senior editor of the X-Men Office. So we also answer a general question about House of X Powers of 10. Here's the gist really quick, because yes, as Jordan's noting, there's a massive retcon in House of X #2 that establishes that the X-Men's human ally Moira McTaggart is secretly a reincarnating mutant who has lived 9 previous lives in which mutants are always exterminated. And in this, her 10th and final life, as far as she knows, she's going to attempt to avert that. And that's what leads to the creation of Krakoa. Here's the answer, Jordan. Onslaught didn't happen until this life. The life isn't the same every single time. And also, she doesn't have a script. All she knows is here's what happened the last 9 times. And every time she's born, she starts doing different stuff, and the butterfly effects change everything. So she doesn't know about that. She also, I don't think they knew about, I personally think Cassandra Nova is new to this timeline, although there's a suggestion she might have existed in the second timeline, but in that one, Moira never met Xavier. So there's a lot of different things going on. I'm just saying, like, Genosha, I don't think happened in a previous timeline either. Like,
right, but you have Magneto and you have Xavier learning this very early, planning for this, and then going back and forth, fighting each other, having their problems.
Well, if you
leading
read
up
Moira's, if you read Moira's notes, you can see exactly where they bring Magneto in, which is after Uncanny X-Men 150, and you can see exactly where Magneto breaks away from them again, which is in the Mutant Genesis relaunch in 91, when he finds out that Moira had experimented on him against his knowledge when he was
a baby. By the way, Magneto turns into a baby. If you
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
But why does Xavier wait this long trying? So he tries his dream first
because he wanted to try. Because he wanted to try, because maybe she's wrong.
Okay.
And they don't have a script, and they're not on rails. They're not play acting. The one thing that they're clearly had to have been play acting to some extent is when she allegedly died in the 90s, in 2000, and they were faking that whole thing, which is what the Moira McTaggart episode goes into a lot, because it's me and Zach Raberoff kind of we call it golem spotting, where we're like trying to be like, here's where the Shi'ar golem comes in, and like, why is Xavier pretending that Moira is human when he's alone with Moira and things like that. That's the fun of a retcon, right? Like, you have to just kind of, again, the catchphrase of my podcast is often "don't worry about it," because I really do think that continuity is, as Teenie Howard, my friend and client, has said on the show before, continuity is an argument. It is not gospel.
Right.
You compile continuity as a writer so that you can make the argument you're going to make about a character. And you look at things that don't contribute to your argument because you want to be aware of them, but you're not required. This is, we sort of called it the Morrisonian approach when we were talking about this, because it's very much what Grant Morrison did in New X-Men. You're not necessarily wedded to every story that ever happened, because it's impossible to make 58 years of continuity actually all tie together as one coherent story. It's just not going to work. Magneto and Xavier, who everybody who's seen an X-Men movie knows are old friends who then had a falling out, that's not true in the 60s. It's not true until Chris Claremont retcons it in the 80s. So that's just sort of how an evolving, ongoing monthly story that changes writing hands and changes over time is going to work, right?
Well, I wish you were at that bar before I made a fool of myself in front of Al Ewing and Karen Gillan and a few other people. But anyway.
Well, Kieran's a sweetie. I'm sure he was nice about it.
The other thing
I'm sure Al Ewing's also a sweetie. I've never met him, but I'm a big fan.
He's a very nice guy. The other thing I want to talk about was one of the best things to come out of this relaunch is that the books got their own identity again, I think, and purpose. For a while, a lot of the X books, you could kind of trade them in and out. And I think the 90s actually kind of did this as well, where each book had kind of a tone and a vibe and a mission statement. I think this came back where you have Marauders as a pirate book, X-Force is an espionage book, Excalibur is a magic book. And I think giving each book its own identity was a huge part of this and what made me excited as a reader.
I would agree. I mean, right now, I really think that the biggest strength of the line, apart from the very collaborative office, an unprecedented kind of level of collaboration in Big Two Comics, as far as I'm aware, that Jonathan Hickman put together with all of these different writers he brought on to the Krakoa project. So all the stories bleed into each other really, organically. I mean, the franchise-wide event 10 of Swords that happened last year was 22 issues that went across all the books, and it does read in hardcover as one story. And I have to say, I think it's an enormously impressive achievement. So there's that, which is a great strength. But the other great strength is that because the line is successful and can sustain a lot of different titles, you have a book for everybody. I've never been an X-Force reader. It's just not what does it for me. There's stuff in Ben Percy's current run on X-Force that I think is really cool, and I'm enjoying reading it, but I'm never going to be like an X-Force fan. Excalibur was my favorite book as a kid, and I loved Teenie Howard's new run on Excalibur, which I think that's why we worked together and why we became friends, because I read the first arc of it and was just like, this is capturing so much of what I loved about that old book. And that's a book about fantasy and magic, and, that is a totally different vibe that some people don't want in their superhero comics at all. The line's been successful enough that we've gotten some more experimental titles this year, stuff like Way of X, which was sort of about philosophy and religion.
One other area, Connor, if you want to jump to another one, was I was thinking about how this, when you read Hoxpox, it really lives in this gray area where there's moments where they're talking about the hope of building their own nation and what mutant kind will do to move forward. But there's also this weird kind of cultish dread. And I kind of like that the experiment that is Krakoa is neither deemed good or bad. It's kind of figuring itself out, and you don't know always what you're rooting for.
Yeah, well, I think that House of X, in particular, Powers of 10 is more about like a future timeline. It's complicated, and read the story if you haven't read it. But if you look at Hoxpox in its entirety, the whole establishment of Krakoa, we're meant to be unnerved, right? It's the characters we know behaving in ways that we're not familiar with, because instead of chasing Xavier's dream of assimilation with humans, they are now deciding, actually, we're going to do our own thing, and you can be cool with it or not cool with it.
And you see that reflected in the other heroes of the Marvel Universe who are really uncertain.
Are not all cool with it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's intentional because it's a debate that's ongoing in just about every minority community there is, right? And also, some of the leaders of Krakoa are not the best people in the world, which is true of many, I would say all nations, right? Like, there's no nation that's ruled by 100% great moral.
Do you want to explain the Quiet
people.
Council is basically half heroes we know, half villains, and they all work together?
It's 12 characters from the history of the X-Men who are all from different political approaches to the mutant question. And some of them, about half of them, are people who we used to fight all the time. But now we have to try to make a compromise that works for the whole minority group. And it's I think it's absolutely fascinating, which is why I got brought back in so hard that I ended up starting a podcast. But I think, though, that part of it is a lot of comics fans, I think, are taken aback when the minority metaphor of the X-Men gets foregrounded. Because if mutants are an oppressed minority, then when the Avengers object to their self-determination, what does that mean, right? It becomes a point of tension. And so I think that there are a lot of readers who are like, oh, the X-Men are villains now, it's a cult, whatever. Personally, I just can't relate to that, because to me cultish in the sense of like a cult of personality, but that's true of any society that's going to build up around superheroes. I mean, that's comics, right? Like, these characters
cultish in that the first panel you see is Xavier standing there where naked X-Men cling to him, hatching out of eggs.
No, because they're hatching out of eggs, right?
Yeah.
No, I get what you're saying. I'm not talking about you saying that. I'm talking about like the disc, like, Krakoa is a cult,
the other characters in the Marvel Universe. Well, the Avengers.
Yeah,
the Avengers
which characters
fascists,
have? Well,
right?
I don't mean the Avengers. I mean like fans who don't like it. And I just think that we're trafficking in some of that imagery to make you question. But to me, and I'm not saying Krakoa is perfect. Obviously, there are problems with it. We're leading up to Jonathan Hickman's big swan song for now with the franchise, Inferno, which is a 4-issue event that's kicking off in September this month as we're recording. And, that's specifically, I think, going to be about how Charles and Eric and Moira and Emma all have skeletons in their closet that we're going to need to deal with in order to create a Krakoa that is more functional and acceptable to the general populace, right? As opposed to like shadowy government stuff that they didn't, like, no one elected the Quiet Council, right? So it's a structure that needs to be examined. It was supposed to be temporary. And it's just, as with many things that are supposed to be temporary in government, like, ICE. I mean, things that arise out of specific, like, quote unquote necessity situations, emergencies, then tend to stick around, right? And just become like, we can't get rid of.
On top of that, they're breaking their own rules, right? They set up this thing about resurrecting mutants and stuff, but they're not allowing characters like Destiny, other precogs, to be resurrected.
Correct, because it would conflict with Moira's plans, according to Moira. So, there's hypocrisy that is being exposed. But in general, I think that the whole idea, like, the X-Men are villains now because they've stopped doing nothing but bend over backwards for people who don't seem to care when they get repeatedly genocided, is just kind of stupid. Like, to me, it speaks to the reader with that complaint identifying with the human oppressor rather than with the mutant minority, which is not a reading of the text that I can understand.
Once again, you can call the Avengers fascists. It's okay.
They do work for the U.S. government and employ their superpowers as police officers, essentially.
They are. They're just cops.
There is some argument to be made.
Dan, enjoy all that Avengers.
Honestly, That more than anything else, and people are going to yell at me about this, I'm not dissing Carol Danvers. I think she's an interesting character, but that more than anything else is why Storm is the Marvel Wonder Woman and Carol Danvers is not, because that is not the type of hero that Wonder Woman is. Wonder Woman is a very different kind of hero. She's not, I mean, she'll wear some...
Carol Danvers is a space
she'll
cop.
wear some stars and stripes to the war,
cop.
but it's different. It's just very different.
Yeah.
If you have problems with any of this, please direct them all to Dan. He will handle all complaints about Avengers, characters, cops, anything.
Fuck the Avengers.
The Inhumans, if anybody cares.
No, please personally text me, and I want to know where you live. You like the Inhumans, because I'm down to throw hands.
I think Crystal is fun. She's just a messy bitch who lives for drama, and I relate to that. You know? But generally speaking, I was pretty pleased to see the back end of the Inhumans.
The only thing that's like bothered me about the entire Krakoa era, and it's nothing that has to do with anyone in their office or anything like that, is that Spider-Man has been nowhere in it. Like, I really want him to hang out with Wolverine and come to the island and like see everything, because they're friends. Like, they've always been he like taught at the school for a while.
Well, I think that part of that is that we needed to establish Krakoa first. And I think now that it's been established, we're going to see more, like the new Krakoan X-Men team is in New York City, right?
Yeah.
So like they're trying again, now that we've established this is in story. Cyclops and Jean are like, now that we've established ourselves and we know what we're doing, we need to be back out in the world. We need to do outreach, etc.
Yeah.
So I think I think that Dawn of X was very self-contained, very intentionally, and that now the Reign of X is sort of spreading outward into other things. The plots in Excalibur and Otherworld and Camelot and Avalon are tied into all the stuff with Black Knight that Cy Spurrier is doing. There's lots of crossover stuff kind of happening. Storm is now in a position of enormous power that crosses her over into Guardians of the Galaxy. That
Queen of Mars,
you
should say. She's Queen of Mars.
Yeah, look, she's the regent of the solar system, babe. So, I'm just saying that there's a lot of... I think that's spreading out. Now, and Zeb Wells is one of the writers on the new relaunch of Spider-Man, and Zeb Wells is in the X Office, so hopefully that will mean more synchronicity there.
The X-Men are free of establishing themselves, and now Spider-Man is free of Nick Spencer, so we can have nice times together. But like now we're going to get hopefully two very interesting stories going forward for two things that I love very much. I will say, and I was hard on Secret Empire, so I do want to give Nick Spencer credit where I think that something's absolutely great, which is that I heard today, because I haven't read a Spider-Man comic since Mephisto got rid of Mary Jane. I literally have never read a Spider-Man comic again.
You should read the
Don't care. I'm out. I don't care. I was reading for MJ. I read for the women characters. That's like, so Spider-Man was just never my thing, but then like his wife was cool, right?
Read her solo.
So, I will do that. But my point is, I haven't read a Spider-Man comic since that happened because I was annoyed and I was like, who cares? So point is, and this is no offense to the brilliant writers who have worked on Spider-Man since. I'm sure there's lots of great stuff. I just haven't. But I heard today that Nick Spencer established that the Gwen Stacy who fucked Norman Osborn in Sins Past, the worst Spider-Man story besides the one where Mephisto gets rid of his marriage, today turned out to be a robot. And that is the kind of retcon that I fucking love. I love and it was a Doombot retcon. Those are always really delightful to me. So I just want to say, Nick Spencer, I have been very critical in the past of work of yours that I didn't enjoy. And so that's why I want to stress, I love that Sins Past Gwen is a Doombot or whatever. That's just hilarious. I smiled about that for 2 hours this morning. So thank you.
Sometimes your son just gaslights you into fucking a robot. It's no big deal. It's just Spider-Man stuff.
Honestly, that could be an X-Men plot very easily. So 100%. I'm into it.
Yeah. Reading that was like, okay, Nick, you did something good. Now it needs to be over.
But it is. So, you know, we're about to get a whole new era if you haven't enjoyed this one. So.
I'm so excited.
Very excited for Zeb and that whole crew.
Yes.
I mean, I'm a Zeb Wells stan. So, there's also, I mean, Kelly Thompson, Saladin Ahmed, there's a lot of people working on that line. I can't think of everybody else because, again, I'm not like a Spider-Man person, but I read the press release and was like, this is a lot of really talented people. So,
and I like a brain trust writing that book. I think you didn't read it, but
going to kind of an X Office kind of vibe is good. And they did this with Spider-Man in the
Brand New Day. Yeah.
Yeah.
In that era, that was when I quit. But I remember
It was a good one.
People,
Take our word
people
for it.
liked it. I know that people liked it.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you to your listeners for listening to me. And here's the thing: Jordan and I are friends. We haven't seen each other in a while, and so we didn't know that we were going to be the guests together on this show until like a couple days ago. And so it's just been. You've heard essentially our reunion in the middle of Daniel's podcast. So
Good luck,
I apologize.
Dan, editing this thing. I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, this one's going to have to get pushed back another week. It's fine.
Well, you should check out my podcast. Are we doing plugs now? What are we doing? I'm sorry. I'm figuring out. Okay.
Plug.
Sorry. We have I'm not being to listeners because you can't look at the Google Doc we're in. I'm not being rude. We're just like I'm looking at like the bullet points and I'm trying to figure out where we are because I have a hard stop soon and Daniel's been so nice about that. So I'm just like, oh shit, what do I do? Anyway, all that being said. You can find Cerebro, my podcast, at cerebrocast.com or on Twitter and Instagram at cerebrocast. It's a character-by-character, newbie-friendly exploration of all 58 years of the X-Men franchise. I will tell you everything you need to know about a given character and everything that you don't need to worry about. You can jump in with any episode that strikes your fancy. They all are sort of meant to stand alone, but there may be references to earlier episodes. I, of course, would love if you started with episode 1 on Betsy Braddock and continued all the way up to the most recent as we're recording this, which is episode 50 on Charles Xavier. I have a guest every week. I try to bring in lots of different perspectives because this minority metaphor is really expansive and I, am a white guy, so there's not I can't speak to every single experience, right? So we talk about sexuality in the X-Men, gender in the X-Men, race in the X-Men, class in the X-Men, disability in the X-Men, all kinds of stuff. It's a really, I have a blast doing it and people seem to like it. So check it out if you're interested in getting into this franchise. A lot of people have told me that it has helped them get in the way that Jay and Miles explain the X-Men, which was sort of like the first huge X-Men podcast I think helped a generation of readers start reading, and I'm excited to maybe do some of that myself. It's cool when someone tells you that they picked this thing up that you love because they listened to your show. So give it a listen if you're someone who has had your interest piqued by this podcast, and I'd love to chat.
Have Dan on for Mr. Sensitive.
If I do, I'm not looking to do ecstatic stuff.
You got to. They count, man.
I will, but like not. I honestly I'm maybe the big ones. Like most of the thing is you need a whole Valadane.
Dead Girl.
You need
Dead Girl.
I was like Dead Girl, You Go Girl, or like Mr. Sense. There's a couple characters you could do, but there's a lot of characters where like they don't have 12 issues, which is the full Valadane, which you have to have in order to have an episode of Cerebro. That's the rule.
12.
So
12. Wait, Adam X. Adam X doesn't have 12 issues.
He does.
He's got the. Oh, wait. He's got the.
Captain Marvel.
There's the Captain Marvel. And then also he made a bunch of cameos in the Utopia era.
Yeah,
and
he did.
then he had a couple cameos in. Like he popped up in Leah Williams' X Factor early on. By the time of the episode.
I own that page.
Well, there you go. I mean,
Yeah.
that was, I would have maybe made an exception there, though, because I was interviewing Fabian Nicieza, and I wanted to talk about. Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I love Fabian. He's such a sweetheart, and it was
Adam X.
It was a funny. Oh, well, I'm glad someone does.
I'm the only one.
You love
Well,
what?
Fabian loves him, clearly. Adam X, he said.
Yeah.
I have to say, I was so, I mean, you've heard the episodes, so you know this. I was just so relieved that they were letting Fabian do the story because as a longtime X-Men continuity head kind of fan, it had always bothered me that it had never, happened. Yeah. So when X-Men Legends was announced, I was like, look, I'm obsessed with the Krakoa era. I don't really need this book, but god damn is it satisfying to hear that 25 years later they're going to resolve the Adam X story. So I was happy about it.
He's the only person I troll on the internet because he doesn't want to talk about X-Men and stuff, but he wants you to promote his newest thing, or so I only ask him Super Pro questions all the time.
He's
a nice
the
guy.
funniest is when he was on my show and I was like trying to dig deep into the Betsy and Kanon retcon because like as a Psylocke and Revanche fan, I gave a shit and he was just like, I wrote that 30 years ago and I don't remember a goddamn thing about it. And, like it was he thought it was adorable that I cared. And that is the thing that's fun about this stuff is that we as the fans who obsess over it sometimes think more about it than people who wrote it on a monthly schedule as a job decades ago. So that's part of why fan discussion like this can be so fruitful. And one of the things that's really nice about the podcast is creators who I really respect reaching out and telling me, like, I really appreciated you digging into this work or whatever, you know, more than I ever thought anybody would or whatever. Like, and it's a good feeling. It feels good. I like this. Generally, this is like something that consumes my work and my day job also, is like, I think that low art is still valuable, right? Like I am all about elevating popular culture as something that people say. I got a media studies degree from the New School. I'm like that guy. I'm like, you know, it's like it's a thing for me. But anyway, so yeah, come check out my podcast. You should watch Jordan's show. It's all on Hulu.
Yeah. Give it a watch.
Stars Patton Oswalt.
Give it a watch.
Jordan, do like a bit.
Come on, do your thing.
Yeah, all 10 episodes of M.O.D.O.K are streaming on Hulu, so you can go check them out. And I've got a lot of fun comic-related stuff I can't talk about yet, but hopefully soon. I'd love to come talk again with you, Dan.
Yeah, you're not getting out of that. So you can find us at gatecrashers.fan. You can find us on all social medias at gatecrasherspod. We will see you next week. And I will...
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Dan. This was so much fun.
It's the Gatecrashers.